We have some issues in modern horseback archery today as far as how the courses are set up, the speeds of the horse, and all this stuff. It doesn't blend very well, and we have some major problems with that. However, in the ancient times, and we know that for a fact from Turkey, from records that we have dating back to 15th, 16th, 17th century, most of the horseback archery was what the Americans called when they attacked Iraq, shock and awe. Okay? Because it was done at a full gallop, shooting, then fanning out, shooting. You had to be ambidextrous. You had to be able to shoot both right-handed and left-handed. And coming back, what they call a whirlwind. Okay? So that was the tactic, to soften up the ranks, and then the heavy cavalry would come in to finish the job. Okay? And as you know, horseback archery, because of horseback archers, the largest empire ever created was the Mongolian Empire. That stretched from China all the way to Europe. Okay? And it was done on horseback with a bow and arrow. Okay? Very amazing feat. I mean, Romans had a large empire. They never really adopted horseback archery, the Roman soldiers. They were cavalry, which is javelins and spears. But they knew how important horseback archery is, so they would have their auxiliary group, troops that were like Scythians or Parthians that they would employ on a battlefield. So I do have enough room here. As going back to his technique, so he would use, let's say, go to 6 arrows. If you use his three-finger technique, there's a particular way to knock it, which already in itself is a problem. Not so much today because we're only using field points. Okay, so it's not that big of a deal. So what you have to do to knock efficiently and fast, you cannot put the string on a bow like this and then shoot. It takes too much time. What you need to do is you have to go between a string and a bow. When you pull the arrow out, you go between a string like so, you knock it, and then you shoot. Okay? Right there is a big problem. When you when they get their bow, the horseback archers, they have to glue a piece of rawhide right here, because they constantly jab the bow accidentally, because everything happens so quickly. Now imagine in the old days if you had an arrow with a sharp point, like a broadhead, cutting flesh. Well, what can happen in a rush and in a chaos of the battle, you can very easily cut your string. When you cut your string, you're done. Right? So again, that would not be a good thing. So whether the horseback archer started with the three-finger technique or not, I think it was more along the lines of what Henrik was explaining, that the techniques were somewhat different, like a tertiary style and stuff like that. Because even with that particular technique, you can actually shoot on this side of the bow, because knocking on the opposite side of the bow in your right hand is actually more proficient and keeps the arrow more securely up against the string. Okay? So this is really important, and this is the next point I want to make. If you're knocking on this side with 3 fingers, what happens? If your technique isn't perfect and correct, if you twist your fingers, what happens? See that? So your wrist and your fingers have to be perfectly formed so you can shoot properly with the Mediterranean, European style, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so a lot of the horseback archers, when they start this way, just the air friction generated on a galloping horse oftentimes takes the arrow off the shelf. And when they do the kabak and they go up to shoot, this is what happens. Okay? However, if you knock with a thumb, you cannot try to push out that arrow. You can't take it away from me. I can do anything on top of that horse and have that arrow totally secure up against the strike plate on a bow. So this is a big difference. Okay, so now I'll demonstrate some of the shooting, knocking, and the shooting. Most of the knocking today of the arrow in horseback archery is actually performed from the quiver. Because we use the Turkish style, the Mamluk style, the Kabak, the Korean style. For these, it's required that you actually have to pull from the quiver. In fact, if I have to touch up on that, very rarely, when I got into this, there was no information really well written on the subject of knocking and a technique and how you did it. It was very difficult. This was before the internet, so you had to go to library, you had to make phone calls. In the sense, it's a very slow and tedious process of obtaining information. So I kind of had to go and discover that myself. And I really didn't discover anything. I just kind of rediscovered it, I should say. Okay, and so when I started with the same technique when I saw Lajos Kashai holding the arrows in the bow hand. However, that was done very, very rarely, and only in certain cases. We know from the Mamluk manual dating back to the 13th century that particular technique was used only in a case of having to dispatch multiple enemies very quickly, because it's a faster technique of knocking, and but because it was deemed unsafe. And I'll tell you why it's deemed unsafe. Because if you have an accident, you fall off the horse, and I can attest to it because it happened to me. My horse tripped, I'm falling off, I drop my equipment instinctively, and the arrows, as they spill onto the ground, they come down, and I'm coming right onto the arrows. Okay? These people were not stupid. Okay? They also protected their life and their safety. Okay? Just because, we think that they were ancient, that they just were, live hazardous lives. No, that's really not the case. So that's why it's mentioned that it was used rarely, because this technique here is very safe. This is a classical Turkish-style quiver. The arrows are pointing that way, so when you have accidents, you fall off, you will not get pierced by an arrow or anything like that. Okay. Nowadays, it has become a contest in horseback archery about who can pull an arrow faster from the quiver and knock it and let it fly. It's like flinging boogers, it's like let it stick. But there's not enough emphasis actually on the form of shooting. And that's the biggest problem, because targets are too close and the horse is too fast, so the technique suffers. Most of the horseback archers, if they came here to have to compete with you, they would do terrible. That's the biggest problem that we have in horseback archery. I've been trying to push this philosophy of actually slowing down, focusing on the form, increasing distance between the targets, because then it also makes it more fun for people to watch it, rather than having people that just kind of snap shoot and do it in a hurry and it just looks all haphazard. Okay, so I explained the difference between the two techniques. We start with this one here. Okay, as you can see, I've got 6 arrows in my bow hand, and they're tightly clinging to my bow, so they're not sticking out every which way, which is important. In the old days, if you had arrows sticking out like this, like a porcupine, or I call it a spaghetti hand or something like that, if you rode in close ranks, you could very easily get it caught on something, your next rider or in your equipment and stuff like that. So it keeps it very safely along with the bow right here. Okay? So there are 3 ways of knocking. When you go for the arrow, as you can see, you might think, well, how is he going to grab the right arrow? Well, rarely, if you figure out how to do it, you will make a mistake. So you go from the top, you grab the arrow by the index finger and a thumb, by the flat of the nock here, okay? You have to feel the opening, okay? You have the bow in what I call in a home position. Because if it's down here and you try to knock, not only the arrows can slide down, and then you get confused and grab the wrong arrow, but you can get it caught in something as well, your equipment, horse's mane or whatnot. And then you have to come back up, and then you have to shoot. So in horseback archery, everything is about saving time, having as fewer movements as possible to be able to perform shot as quickly as possible. Okay? So you grab it like so with the index finger and a thumb, and there are 3 ways of doing it. 3 basic ways. There could be more, but those are the ones that I actually teach. You have a bow here, because now I'm already focused and I can take advantage of my peripheral vision in the knocking system. You open the fingers gradually like so, you knock, and then you shoot. Whoops. Whoops. So this is basically how you do it. Okay? So it's very quick, but it's then slower with the quiver. However, more safe. The thing is, most of the clinicians, when they teach horseback archery, they kind of emphasize the speed of the knocking. To become fast at knocking, to become fast, you have to become slow first. Because you have to be very fluid. Because one little misknock, as you see that I just did, could basically screw up your ride. One misknock on a target, the horse is not stopping, it's moving. It's not like when you're standing, at the archery butt, shooting. And you're done. So to develop the proper fluidity, you have to stop very slow. Okay, so I'm in a home position again. I grab the arrow as high up as I can on the quiver, close to the fletching. I knock. I slide down. I feel the knock. Again, I grab it with my 2 fingers. Then I keep these fingers closed, and I call it like a scooping of the water, as if you wanted to drink water from the creek. You come to the string. Get another one. Okay. So, when it comes to knocking, there are 3 ways. I just showed you the one where you actually scoop, so you can see it better. You go forward, you hit on a thumb, you rotate, and then you lined up with the knock. You cannot hold the knock. If you hold too high up on the shaft, excuse me, you could have it misaligned. If you hold too far, then you cover the knock itself. So it has to be in the right position. And then you go right into the string, and then you can shoot. The next one is actually the one I teach most often because it seems to be the easiest to grab. You grab the knock the same way, but you keep these fingers closed. Push forward. You can hit on a thumb again and then rotate, or you can go straight in, and look, these fingers become the guide. Okay, so it's very difficult to miss. You can practice this at home just watching TV. Okay, and the next one is the Turkish technique, which is very nifty, but a little bit more difficult to master because there, when you grab the arrow, you come up here, you slide down, then you hold it like this, but the knock has to be already aligned like that. Okay, so then you push forward. And notice that I'm holding the arrow with 2 fingers here. I push forward past the string. I open my thumb slightly to clear the string. Go past the string, and then I'm using these 2 fingers and my hand to knock it. And then you come around with the thumb and shoot. Okay, so these are the 3 basic techniques. Of course, there's a proper way of shooting in archery, which I have not mastered because it seems like I don't have enough time to actually do the very good form after the release, because what's really important is the steadiness of your bow hand. A lot of the people talk about the release, but nobody really talks about how important the hand is in archery, bow hand in archery. If any slight movement upon the release with this hand right here, it's going to affect your accuracy more than a bad release. So to be conscious of it is extremely important. In Ming Dynasty in China, we have documents where they actually practice shooting bow and arrow. It's, at least for men, it's more easy because if you have any muscle, this part will be flat. They would put a cup of water here, and upon the release, it should not fall down. Whether I tried it, it's very difficult, but it doesn't matter whether it works or not because it only emphasizes the fact how much importance they put on the steadiness of the bow hand upon the release and a follow-through. A lot of the people, right after they shoot, they basically, what they do is this. They drop their arm. There should be slight follow-through. Okay, so for example, in Turkish archery, this would be the correct technique. Right there. Okay, so I'm going back like this, in the same direction as the arrow goes, not flipping back like this, not flipping down because you can affect the direction of the arrow upon the release. Your elbow to here is absolutely steady. The only thing that flips is from elbow up, like that. Okay? So this is important. Okay? However, I don't do it on a horse. So I haven't gotten that far. I'm still focusing on accuracy and a proficiency of knocking and everything else. Although I have, won few tournaments, but nonetheless, like I said, to keep everything in mind, to do it correctly at the speed of the horse you're going, where you can cover 100 meters in 8 seconds, and you have to shoot, let's say, 3-4 arrows in that span of time. It's a big challenge. Because you have to feel the horse, the moving of the horse. If the horse is not good, then you're focusing on the horse and on your shooting, and so it becomes a big problem. So, well, that's basically it. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. I know I spoke too quick in English, so a lot of you probably didn't understand a thing. Yes.
You can focus on your target order with instinct.
Yes, that's what good point. See, normally what they do in horseback archery is this. Notice. Okay. It's too quick. There's no form to it. It's kind of just a follow through. I'm not saying it's entirely incorrect. You can do it if you know what you're doing. However, most people end up in horseback archery with this because they're not conscious of it. It's like just a little snapshot. Because it happens so quickly, they don't really have a good form and they don't really aim. Most of the people that go do horseback archery, as you know, when you're shooting regular targets standing on the ground, you're focusing on a bullseye. But you have all the time in the world as a ground archer to do that. It's a little different in horseback archery because the target's coming up so quickly that you have only a split of a second to perform the shot. So most people, what they do is they look at the target as a whole. Okay, so they shoot at a target as a whole. What it is basically is go back to the way the brain works. That if you look at any object in nature, what you do first, you scan horizon. And then, in a split of a second, you focus on the object that you want to see. So, same thing happens in horseback archery. You have to really have a laser focus, okay? Because otherwise, and you have to give the brain enough time before you train it well to be able to focus. Most people release before they actually focus, and they shoot at the horizon. So the arrows are all over the place. As long as it sticks in a target, that's there's no emphasis on accuracy and proper scoring. Because it's not about speed, it's not about whether you can shoot 12 arrows from a 30-pound bow, because obviously they shot bows that were from 60 to 150 pounds. And I can attest to that because I have examined hundreds of bows from University of Columbia, Metropolitan Museum, Manchester, Istanbul, Germany, and Karlsruhe. These bows were not toys. They were not 30 pounds. That's another thing that most people cannot pull really heavy bows in horseback archery. You think you can pull a 60-pound bow on the ground when you do ground archery. You take that 60-pound bow on a horse, it becomes 80-pound bow. Because why? You take for granted your lower part of the body. Because now on a horse you have to separate the two hobs. Your lower hob from hips down works with the horse. The upper body works as your shooting platform. Okay, so when you're doing certain angles, especially like shooting back, Parthian shot, that 60-pound bow that you so easily handle on the ground feels heavier. Of course, it's not heavier, but it feels heavier because all of a sudden you don't have that lower body to brace yourself, your feet and everything else. So it doesn't really work in unison. So that's it. Anything else?
And how to better train this detailed focus?
How to train this technique?
Yeah.
If anybody wants to do horseback archery,
and basically this focus from the horizon to something smaller.
okay. Well, all you can do is look at the target all day long at the bullseye. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or also the aiming part becomes a problem. You have to understand. First of all, you have to have arrows that are properly matched to the bow to begin with. Okay. But there are several ways of actually helping you to aim. In horseback archery, most people shoot purely instinctively. How many of you shoot purely instinctively? Just that you just look at the, yeah. Okay. But are you familiar with the gap shooting or point of aim? Okay, well.
It would be interesting to do this.
Yeah, so when you take an arrow and put it on a bow, you can actually look down the arrow at the tip in your peripheral vision. Your primary focus is the bullseye. but you can also take into consideration the tip of your arrow. It can't be too long, obviously. You have to cut it the proper length. Depending on what eye dominance you have, okay, you can also use your fist, because if I take my hand and I point at something, and I use my dominant eye, I close the other one, I'm pointing directly at it. So in archery, you can use the same principle. That's the same for ground archery or horseback archery for that matter. If you learn to stabilize the hand and keep it stable and using it in your peripheral vision as your aiming device, besides your primary focus on a target, your archery technique will improve. I mean, actual accuracy, I should say. So you can do it in America because we have guns and we shoot a lot of guns. We have a technique in shooting before you even fire a bullet, because bullets are expensive. You can practice what's called a dry fire. So you take a pistol and you put it on a target. You line up your sights. You do this for a week like that, 300 times a day. Then you put the clip in, the boom, boom, boom. You're going to have it right in the bullseye. And you can do the same with archery. You take your bow, you knock your arrow. You have to really focus. And all you're doing is this. Making sure that you're lining up that fist right below that bullseye, depending on the distance and the kind of elevation that you have just... Do it like this. Focusing, because now you don't have to shoot, so you don't have to worry about that. You're focusing on your hand, making sure that fist is right below that bullseye. And then you start shooting. You do that for a week. We'll see some results. Okay? Anybody else?
And do you stand up from the saddle in the moment?
Yes. Okay, well, good question as well. I was talking about the separation of the body, the two halves of the body. The riding in Europe, before the English actually started colonizing, what we know today as an English style of riding, an English saddle, I have to say that English didn't invent it, but when they came into like North India and got into Orient and saw the style of riding, which is more of a forward seat and higher stirrup, they adopted that, because until that point, the kind of warfare was basically long stirrups, deep saddle with the high pommel of the cantle to keep you safe in, and was bracing for the impact with the lance. Okay, but in Middle East and in Central Asia, it was different. The stirrups were much shorter. Why? Because you had to use your legs, sort of like shock absorbers in a car, like on a Cadillac. You move and you even out the movement. You don't necessarily have to stand. In Mongolia they do. But you have to go into what's called a two-point position in a saddle, which is like for jumping. Your chest is out, you stiffen up your lower back. That's how you separate the two halves of the body. Because if your head bops up and down like this when you're riding a horse sitting in a saddle, you're going to go like this. You can't shoot. So if you look at the good horseback archer, you will see his head gliding just steady like this. Although the horse may be moving, the head is completely steady. And this is really important, that your shooting platform, that's what you shoot from. Okay?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Ребята, можете задавать на своем понятном языке, сейчас ребята переведут вам. Есть вопросы? Пожалуйста. Так много информации.
I know it's too much information too quick. When I teach the clinics, obviously you go through it slow. I go with each person over the steps of it and how to do it correctly. You know, you have to be really thoughtful and mindful about it. In fact, when I teach it, I have one last thing that I show you before I go. When you're learning the technique, the best way to do it is basically to do it in a very meditative manner. It's a kind of a prayerful process. Okay? It's more of a... Archery is physical. Yes, you pull a bow. Okay, so you have to use your muscles. Right? But more than that, archery is mental game. Okay? Can you keep calm under pressure? Can you steady your hand? Can you focus on what you're doing? So when you're learning the technique, whether it's even for ground archery, you can apply these things. It looks kind of stupid, but this is what I teach my students, is that when you're starting, your movements should be like this. Because this way you have the time to really focus on every inch of your move. And this is how your brain actually absorbs it the best and puts it in the memory the best. If you try to do it right from the beginning, very fast, everything becomes like this, herky-jerky. And that is not a good thing. Okay? Because when you apply that to horseback archery, one miss knock, you're done. And you will lose the competition. So you start doing it very thoughtfully, very prayerfully, very slowly. Okay? All right. That's it.
У меня напоследок вопрос. Положение тела во время стрельбы. В седле.
On the horse?
On the horse.
On the horse. Okay, if I had a horse, I could show you, but I don't have a horse. Okay, so basically, I'll show you this sitting. It's basically like this. The reason also you have the short stirrup is if they're too long, when you have to do the back shot, because on a back shot, you have to twist in a saddle. And this part of the butt cheek is basically off the saddle. And this leg here is your anchor on the side of the horse. So the toe is actually pointing straight out. So you can shoot right over the back of the horse like this. But if your stirrups are too long, your foot will come out of the stirrup. And then when you come back into the forward position, you will have no stirrup, you will have no security. Okay?
Thanks.
Друзья, все, кто понимает, что я говорю, кто не понимает, переведите. Давайте поблагодарим Лукаса за прекрасный и всех наших лекторов, которые сегодня... Я считаю, что это что-то такое магическое и невиданное еще в Украине. Я надеюсь, что это всех вас подвинет развиваться и достигать новых вершин. Поэтому всем спасибо, что пришли. И давайте поблагодарим вместе Лукаса за долго изобретать велосипед, либо далеко-далеко ехать за этим. И не 1000 миль. Поэтому...